Hello and welcome to this TeamMate connector overview training. The purpose of this training is to bring potential resellers of the TeamMate connector up to speed as quickly as possible on all the various different phases of a deployment of a connector between your existing PBX and Microsoft Teams. I'm going to jump right in and try and move through pretty quickly. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to cover what the TeamMate connector does, really high level if you're new to this, the architecture, the various roles within the connector, a module on Microsoft training, a module on how to build the enterprise and manage the enterprise as a reseller in the TeamMate portal, a bit on troubleshooting the various components, and then an intro to using the knowledge base and support system in place. So what does TeamMate do? TeamMate essentially builds a PBX soft phone using the native calling features within all the various Microsoft Teams endpoints. These include mobile application, desktop client, browser, and actually on hard phones as a client as well. TeamMate makes it easy to manage, to set users up, and to resell, to set users up as a service provider or some other distributor, and also the option for advanced PBX integration for the user in Teams. TeamMate is built entirely in Azure. All the components in the middle of this picture are in Azure. On the right is generally the starting point of a service provider with SIP-enabled PBX and user devices in the field. On the left is Microsoft Teams. The connector uses provisioning to PowerShell in Microsoft to set up the users and the direct routing connection, the media connection, and to the Graph API to manage interaction within the application if that's used by the enterprise. There are four major roles that participate in using the TeamMate connector. The end user in Teams can call and use a Teams application. The enterprise admin can do quite a bit. This is the Microsoft either global or delegated admin, has control over initial registration and direct routing solely and can activate users solely. The reseller or service provider, who is the vendor to that business, that Microsoft enterprise business, has the roles of adding enterprise and can do much of the PBX portal and other configurations subject to approval by the enterprise admin. And finally, at the highest level, the master reseller can add a reseller. Common flow for the TeamMate roles would be here. First, a service provider reseller adds an enterprise. The initial registration, direct routing setup are performed by the global administrator at the customer. That's a short process. Then the rest of the PBX settings are inputted, and the global admin finally approves them and loads them into Microsoft. Understanding the TeamMate connector is understanding the PBX and, very importantly, also understanding Microsoft for calling. What we're going to cover in this module is licensing required to use Teams and Teams calling, the credentials required for setup, impact on the Microsoft admin layer settings, impact on the Teams admin within the Microsoft Office settings, and then known issues that we've seen to date in deployment. So for starters, Microsoft user licensing that includes Teams is generally able to have phone system or a comparable add-on. We provide through these links readily available information in our knowledge base that tells which licenses and which add-on licenses are acceptable and which combinations. These are subject to change as Microsoft adds or changes names or changes SKUs. If you're in doubt, if the license is not on the list above, please ask us if it's authorized. If it's not on the list, it will not work. Microsoft user credentials that participate in setting up the connection with the PBX and Microsoft calling, there's two of them. There's the global admin, which is the overall admin authority in a Microsoft enterprise. And there's a delegated admin called Team Service Admin and Skype Business. Both of those have to be selected for the role of that user. This chart shows what each of those admins can do as they interact with the setup of TeamMate. So Global Admin, as we've seen in previous slides, does the initial enterprise reg and the direct routing setup. At that point, the delegated authority can manage the users and the PBX. The only other place the admin needs to be involved is in authorizing the setup of an application in Teams. This is enterprise level access requirement in Microsoft. On initial login, the first thing that the global admin has to do is grant permissions. These 5 permissions are required to do the setup. In addition, there's a consent to allowing delegated authority within their own organization to Team Service Admin and Skype for Business Admin. To learn more about these permissions, you can go follow the link there and go to the TeamMate knowledge base and read up on why these permissions are required. When you do add an enterprise to this connector with TeamMate, you are having some impact on their admin. First thing our system automates is the setup of a test user or a user that has a domain name that's the same as the domain name of the direct routing domain. This user has to be licensed and have a phone system, and once they're authorized, that domain is then authorized and able to be used as the direct routing domain. This will appear as SBC with a number .connecttoteams.com generally in the domain list once set up. The test user is not to be deleted ever. This is the only user in the organization with that domain, which is in use as direct routing. If you delete the test user, you invalidate the direct routing. However, the licenses that are automatically assigned to that test user by our system in direct routing setup can be recouped. They can be unassigned and assigned elsewhere. In the Teams admin, there are also a number of settings that are changed through the TeamMate integration. One would be a phone number or extension is assigned per activated user. 2, there's a normalization rule that allows extension dialing out. So you dial 1001 and the PBX sees 1001 instead of any kind of prepending that Microsoft might include. 3, there's an option in user setup to leave or disable TeamMate's voicemail. So if the PBX voicemail is the one that's going to be used, you might want to disable Teams voicemail. This disables it in Teams. 4, what we do is in the menu on the right, which is in Team Service Admin under Direct Routing, we're adding a voice route. We are not adding an SBC. It's a multi-tenanted approach to direct routing. And finally, if you add in the application, there is a group, a team, and an application added in on behalf of that enterprise. One thing to keep in mind is the Microsoft Global Admin and Team Service Admins of the enterprise do have access to all this information, so they have the ability to mess it up, to make changes that affect how routing works. So better to inform them to not to mess with it or to stay out of it or to document really clearly what they do so you can unwind it. There are a few known issues with Microsoft. This list will grow as Microsoft grows and changes this offering. For setting up direct routing, a domain must be identified, an existing domain on the enterprise. That domain needs to have the service Skype assigned to it. Many do. Previously installed direct routing, if another attempt has been made with another system or a PowerShell manual process of setting up direct routing, it's best to remove that completely. Generally, the interplay is on the user. You can have multiple direct routings or voice routes on an enterprise. When you try to change them on the user, there can be some conflict. That's why we recommend full removal before assignment. Often Teams users have tried out calling, and often they use a Microsoft calling plan if that's available in their area. This is actually a license that's been assigned to them called Microsoft Domestic Calling, which needs to be unassigned. If it's assigned, it blocks routing calls to a direct routing, and therefore you cannot enable the connection to your PBX. The final issue is large, and this is about Microsoft propagation issues. A bunch of things you do to set up TeamMate Connector, invoke PowerShell, and take time to propagate in Microsoft. This means that you have to wait, and you see variable results that no one has control over except Microsoft. The next section of the training discusses what it takes to provision an enterprise and connect their enterprise Microsoft Teams calling to their existing PBX. We look at this primarily from the reseller perspective, which is, as we've discussed earlier, the level above enterprise setup. In this section, we'll be discussing what it means to log in as a reseller versus an enterprise to the TeamMate portal, how you create direct routing, how you add and manage PBX users, and the Teams application involves setting up an end user portal or feature code optionally. We'll look at what it takes to do branding, what branding is currently available, how you can track and troubleshoot users via notifications, and I have some thoughts also on the onboarding workflow that we've also discussed a bit earlier. First of all, there are two different logins to the TeamMate portal. First, logging in with Microsoft Global Admin or delegated Microsoft credentials is represented on the left, and this is considered the TeamMate Enterprise Provisioning Portal. On the right, as a reseller to enterprises, you log in with TeamMate credentials and have a view of all of your different enterprise customers. As you can see, there are certain tasks that the reseller cannot do. These all involve tasks that require Microsoft credentials, such as registering an enterprise and giving permissions, setting up the direct routing itself, activating users in Teams, and ultimately deploying, if you require it, the application. To create direct routing, the process is straightforward from the beginning. An email is generated by the reseller to invite the enterprise at their global admin email address. This email contains two pieces of information: a complete button to confirm and register that enterprise, which leads you to the permission screen we saw earlier, and an invitation code, which is used to activate the direct routing. In addition to the invitation code, the enterprise global admin needs to select from a drop-down available enterprise domains registered in their enterprise in Microsoft. After that, the next steps are automated. These involve things we've looked at earlier: building the test user, activating the direct routing domain, and ultimately confirming the direct routing is in service. These two steps together, initialization and direct routing, are the first two steps global admin will take as they interact with the TeamMate portal. The next steps can all be performed by the reseller. These involve adding in PBX details, PBX SIP domain and SIP proxy, voicemail feature code, non-standard ports if in use. PBXs can be single or multi-tenant. And one piece of advice is make sure you choose the right PBX type. There are different settings based on different PBXs. Once a PBX is set up, the next step is to set up users. Users involve selecting a user, Teams user, from a drop-down. These should be Teams users that have the phone system license. If you're logged in as global admin or delegated admin, you can see that information. And then populating the PBX information from the phone number you want associated in Teams with the user, usually the same as used on the PBX, the SIP user credentials, password. If you are installing access, single sign-on access to a portal for that particular user, you have your portal that you're going to display through TeamMate's application. You need to put in the portal login information and password, which will be used during the single sign-on process. Optionally, we allow you to add a Teams application. This is in addition to the dial pad available in all Teams presentations. It gives you an application that you can brand, you can name and brand, and you can insert your portal if you have one. Keep in mind that it does require a Microsoft Global Admin to set up the application or load the application. A lot of the features within applications can be managed by delegated admins or resellers, except for the application setup itself. The end user portal requires information that you have to bring from whichever portal you're using, your current portal auth URL, single sign-on information, and advanced access token credentials if they are in use. This is information that does not come from TeamMate or Microsoft. It comes from the PBX or PBX provider. Feature codes, which are mapped to feature codes in the PBX, can be built and or bulk uploaded into the Teams Enterprise. These let you select the code itself, the string that will be sent, *78, *79, and a name of that code, so as it presents in Teams for the user, they'll know what they're doing. And then if there are inputs required, such as a phone number for call forwarding, it can be added. In addition, there is a selection button to determine if you are using the call cards and you want to use these feature codes buttons to appear on those cards during live calls only for features like call recording on and call recording off that are used from the PBX. The reseller portal allows you some branding control over the enterprise portal that the enterprises you sign up will see, the logo, the name on the top left, the footer in the middle on the bottom, and you can remove the knowledge base, which is a link to the TeamMate knowledge base. Suggested workflows for the setup of an enterprise are as follows. The first 4 steps have to be performed to activate the dial pad and set everything up via PowerShell. This spreadsheet details what the action is. Initiation involves a reseller sending an email and a global admin clicking through the complete button on the email and authorizing permissions. Direct routing is that same global admin clicking on direct routing and setting up, inputting the invitation code they've received, selecting a domain, and kicking off the setup process for the direct routing, which generally takes 2 to 4 minutes, although is subject to Microsoft propagation and can take longer. PBX details and the user details are generally inputted by the reseller because they know that information, and the user, the global admin or team service admin, has to come in once those are built and sync up so those users are loaded into Microsoft. Optionally, there are a few additional steps if you do want to set up the application, the portals, and the feature codes performed first in application construction by the global admin, subsequently by the reseller to set up the single sign-on portal, credential, and feature codes. These are in duller colors in this presentation because they were optional. There are a number of troubleshooting situations that come up when working with complex integration, like the one between your PBX and Microsoft Teams. This list documents a few of the higher volume problems that we've seen that come up. Tried to give a sense of how they're presented by the users of the technology and then how they're diagnosed and solved by the reseller. Some issues have to do with wrong credentials. Some have to do with wrong licensing. One important one I've mentioned a few times is previous direct routing causing interplay issues, and obviously the slow Microsoft provisioning is an unsolvable problem. These things are documented in the TeamMate knowledge base, which is a good resource for resellers. The knowledge base does have a lot of information about common issues, Microsoft settings, and then a step-by-step walkthrough with pictures and instructions of the setup process that we're talking about here. It's quite searchable by topic, and it's linked in any screen you're in the TeamMate portal